Hello and welcome back to the Team Called Palace YouTube channel. As you can see today, I'm joined by Jack Pearce from the 5-Year Plan podcast. We are going to be talking about our 3 best performing Palace players from the season so far. Before we get into that, Jack, first of all, have you recovered from the disappointment of Saturday?
Yeah, it was a lively one, wasn't it? It was an entertaining match. We'll take that at least, because not all the visits to Selhurst so far this season have been as entertaining. But yeah, disappointed with the defeat. Disappointed to concede a late winner, particularly the type of goal it was. But some positives. Eberechi's performance in the first half was brilliant, and we saw Michael Elise for the first time this season. So got to take the small wins, even in the defeat, and we'll see where we go from here. But 2 weeks now to kind of get the players together. I know we've got a few drifting off for international duty, but the fact that Ebbs and Michael Elise will be under the watchful eye of Roy and Ray for the next 2 weeks is a good thing, I think, and we'll see how we go at Luton in a couple of weeks' time.
Obviously, we're now 12 games into the Premier League season. What have you made of it kind of overall? Because it feels like this international break is kind of the calm before the storm, isn't it? Things are going to get very hectic from here on in. So what have you made of the first part of the campaign?
Highs and lows, as with every Palace season, but I guess we've got the points that probably we warrant. I think we're probably fairly placed in the league table given the performances that we've had. So I think we're 13th as we talk. So that's a little bit off where we were this time last season, and I think given the injuries, that's probably okay. But as you kind of allude to there, Matt, the difficulty is we've had some of the games that we probably anticipate picking up a few more points, and we go into December with quite an ominous looking fixture list. So we'll see how we go in December, but we can go into it assured that we've got a bit of a buffer between us and the bottom 3, which is disappointing to talk like that. I appreciate not every fan wants to hear Palace fans talking about things like that, particularly with the talents that we have at our disposal. But I still think we'll pick up a few points in that December run. I think there are fixtures where we may be able to pick up a few more points than we might anticipate, as we do every season. So, yeah, we go into it hopeful, but particularly with the return of Eberechi and Michael Elise from their injuries.
So, as I said, myself and Jack are going to be counting down our 3 best Palace players from the season so far. Now, when I suggested this to Jack, I didn't realise quite how hard it was going to be. And I've spent the last 24 hours changing my mind. So I think there's going to be lots of opinions on this one. If you disagree with anything we say, or you'd like to add your 3 best performing Palace players from the season so far, feel free to do that in the comments below this video. So, Jack, kicking off with your number 3, who have you gone for?
I've gone for Jefferson Lerma as my number 3. I think despite the lack of transfer dealing in the summer, which has been much talked about, I think it's probably right that we do highlight probably the biggest success of our January purchases. And I think Lerma has added something to our midfield and our squad that we were lacking. I think to have a Premier League ready player come into the club and then add to the starting 11 so instantly as he did at the start of the season was really good and kind of highlighted what a good piece of business that was. Obviously struggled with an injury in the midway part of this early phase of the season, but came back in recent weeks, and I thought was one of our better performers on Saturday, and showed why he was brought in. I think that ability to do things on both sides of the ball in terms of contribute to the defensive efforts, but also then impact the higher third. I think he'll be disappointed that he didn't put that chance away at 2-1. That probably would have capped off an excellent performance if he'd have been able to kind of grab his first goal for Palace. But he did get an assist, even though I think the assist probably should go down to James Tarkowski if we're giving it to anyone. But no, Jefferson Lerma for me, I think it's probably worth noting that despite the lack of transfer business, as a lot of Palace fans see it, we did add a good one in the summer.
He's a really interesting one, isn't he, Jefferson? Because he's the sort of player that when he's playing for another team, you don't like him because he likes to get amongst it. There's a little bit of housery going on, but I must admit, when I heard that we were signing him, I was absolutely delighted because he had a fantastic season for Bournemouth. As you said, he just kind of complements our midfield really well. I think we needed someone like him alongside Doucouré. There were so many times last year where we sort of said Doucouré's kind of holding it together on his own. And now he's got Lerma alongside him. That does make a massive difference. Obviously, as you said, he was fantastic on Saturday. Just a shame that Czech wasn't there alongside him. I think if he had been, it might have been a different outcome. But there we go. That's by the by. For my number three, I've gone for Jordan Ayew because I feel like in the absence of the likes of Eze, Elise, and of course Wilfried Zaha, I feel as though Jordan stepped up a bit. I mean, he's got 1 goal and 3 assists in the Premier League so far this season. I think he has been more direct. I think it's noticeable that our attacks are kind of more spread out. They're not just always down the left like they used to be when Wilfried was there. They're more kind of all over the pitch now. And I think his kind of form in the early part of the season has been important. Obviously, we've seen some fantastic assists. I'm thinking the one at Sheffield United for Odsonne Edouard, the one against Burnley for Jeffrey Schlupp. And also, he keeps on winning these fouls. You know, he is by far and away the most fouled player in the Premier League. Maybe if we were slightly stronger from set pieces, we might be able to utilise that even more. But yeah, I just think of someone who is fairly consistent, kind of goes under the radar a little bit. And as I said, missing some of those key attacking players, I went for Jordan Ayew as my number three.
It's a fair shout. I think the love-hate affair that many Palace fans have with Jordan Ayew is probably tipping towards the love side at the moment. And yeah, I think there's been games this season where we've had very little attacking output, but Jordan does seem to be the focal point at times and has the ability, as you say, Matt, to get us up the pitch and win fouls and take the pressure off the defence, a defence that at times have had to deal with quite a lot. So I think Jordan Ayew, from an outside perspective, is probably underrated and is often a topic of conversation amongst Palace fans in terms of what he does well for us. But yeah, I think his role in the squad is vital, really, particularly when we are lacking some attacking talent. Roy clearly trusts him. He's just been rewarded with a new contract extension. So the club value Jordan, even if there are some fans that might not. So I'm pleased with Jordan. And I think, even with Michael Elise coming back into the team, I think it's quite possible we'll see Jordan Ayew maintain his place in the starting 11, but perhaps coming in from the left-hand side rather than the right.
Yeah. And I must admit, I didn't think he had his best game on Saturday. I actually thought when Schlupp came off, I would have been tempted to take Jordan off. But as you say, Jordan has shown in the past that he's more than capable of playing on the left. And I do think as well that when you've got the likes of Eze and Elise, Jordan does offer you something slightly different in attack. Yes, we know he's not going to maybe beat as many players as them. He's not going to create as many great opportunities. He's not going to maybe get you off your seat as much. But in a Crystal Palace attack in the Premier League, I definitely think there's a place for him. And I think also, when you think about how much we paid for him, he has just been a fantastic signing and a fantastic servant for the club. So, yeah, a really kind of strong, consistent performer. Jack, let's move on to your number two.
Yeah, I'm torn. My number one is quite set, so I'm a bit torn as to who might miss out here. But I'm probably going to go for Sam Johnston. I think it's probably fair to give Sam a nod here. I think his form in the early part of the season has been one of the shining lights. Again, another player that's been rewarded with a new contract in light of his form, and obviously is number one at the moment. With the arrival of his close friend and former teammate at Manchester United, albeit Dean Henderson's currently injured. So there's been a lot of talk about the goalkeeping position, but Sam is very comfortable there at the moment, and has actually developed into England's number two, which has been a kind of wonderful aside too. He's gone away with England during this international break and looks ahead to Germany in the Euros next year with 1 foot on the plane, you could say. So really pleased for him. I think some of the saves he's made this season have been really good, but it's actually his distribution with the ball at his feet, which I think has impressed me the most. I think that's improved as he's been our number one since he came in, making his debut against Leeds last year. So, yeah, I think Sam Johnson has proved a bit like Lerma and a bit like Ayew, as you said, to be one of those astute signings. Came in on a free transfer, had to wait his time to get to be number one. But yeah, he's very much the number one at the moment. And I think even if Dean Henderson is fit right now, I think Sam Johnson is number one and would be number one for the foreseeable, given his form.
I must admit, I haven't got Sam Johnson in my top three, and I actually feel really bad about it because one, I really like him, And two, I think he has done really well. I mean, the stats do speak for themselves. The amount of clean sheets he's got, as you say, doing really well for England on the international stage. I think for me, one thing that I'm kind of almost holding against him, and it's probably incredibly harsh, is the fact that I don't feel as though he's made that many outstanding saves. But in a way, me and Ben have spoken about this on the pod, the fact that sometimes you don't almost like notice him. He's not like going from sort of really high to really low. He's just very, very consistent, does the things you expect him to do. As you say, I think his distribution is actually a little bit underrated as well. And I do think that, when we have everyone fit and available, when we have Sam in goal, the usual back four, Lerma and Decore in front of them, I do think that despite shipping a few goals in recent weeks, we do have a really solid base, and he is a massive part of that. So, yeah, part of me feels a little bit bad leaving him out, but I can completely understand why you've gone for him. And actually, I'm quite glad that you've gone for him, seeing as I haven't. So, yeah,
Well,
Sam
I think
Johnson.
it's a fair point you raise. We have conceded a fair few goals in instances this last year, but the last few games. But he is, I think, joint top of the charts in terms of clean sheets kept this season. So, while there have been games where we've shipped a fair few, there have been instances where he's earned us points. I'd say that the game at Burnley, I felt that game kind of tipped in the moment of a couple of decent saves. I mean, I agree with you. Nothing outstanding, nothing that you would expect him to not make, but he made them, and that's the crucial bit. You need a goalkeeper to make the saves at the right time, and I think that gave us the platform to go on and get the second, and what looked like a comfortable 3 points actually probably turned on Sam Johnson making a couple of good saves in quick succession.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Sam as well, one thing I find quite interesting, as you say, clean sheets, top of the charts for that, but his kind of goals prevented stats are actually quite low, which I find a little bit strange because basically they're kind of, I think, implying from the goals prevented stats that he's kind of conceding the goals you'd expect him to concede. And maybe he's not kind of pulling off stops that are absolutely outrageous and he's not denying loads of clear goal scoring opportunities. I don't know, but I do think that he's an interesting one where I've seen some Palace fans getting really, really high on him in the last few weeks. I'm not convinced I'd go that high, but I do think he's a really solid performer. And as you said, picking him up on a free, fantastic business. He has been really good for us in the early part of the campaign. My number two, I've gone for Czech Decore, which is another one I really wasn't sure about, purely because he has missed a little bit of football so far this season. Obviously, he missed a game on Saturday. He was a massive loss for us. And he's almost one of those players where when he isn't playing, you realise just how good he is. I mean, for me, I think he's a metronome in possession. I think he's an absolute monster out of possession. When you look at his stats, he's fourth in the Premier League for interceptions. He's seventh in the Premier League for tackles won. And he's still only 23. And I think that he's just got so much potential. It wouldn't surprise me if he did maybe move on possibly next summer for big money, because I think after a couple of years in the Premier League, a lot of top clubs will have had a decent look at him and they might think, you know what, we quite fancy him. But yeah, I'm going for Czech Decore as my number two. I feel as though he's someone that quite often sails under the radar, but I think in some of our kind of wins this season, some of the draws we've kept clean sheets, he's just one of those people who is a massive reason for that. So yeah, I've gone for Czech Decore as my number two.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I think your point about Saturday is a really fair one. I don't think Everton score that third goal and the eventual winner if Czech Decore is on the pitch. I think his defensive instinct probably sounds that one out, and he matches the run of Idrissa Gana Gueye. He's an excellent player. I mean, I had high hopes for him when we signed him. He came with a lot of hope and expectation, but his first season was outstanding, and he started this season brilliantly with Jefferson Lerma next to him as well. So it's one of those that we all probably anticipate that he will go this summer because the interest as you referred to, there was already interest in him, significant interest at that after 1 year. So if he has a season that matches where he was last year or even exceeds it, there's definitely going to be clubs knocking at the door. But that's the model, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it this season. I've heard you guys talking about that model and the fact that we have to test that model at some point, and I wonder whether Czech Decore will be that test of the model in terms of bringing them in for a relatively decent investment by Palace's standards, but to see him then go on for 2-3 times the amount possibly will be the test and see how this model works. But wonderful player. Love what he does. The one thing that's missing is him scoring an absolute rasper from outside the box, and we've come close. So I'm hoping that's not too far away for him. But you're looking forward to him returning. He's top rate, that guy.
I must admit, I'm hoping that, assuming he can stay fit for the majority of the campaign, I'm hoping that he'll actually have a better season because he'll have Jefferson Lerma alongside him. I do feel as though the two of them can really complement each other and bring the best out of each other. As you said, that model, we've spoken about it quite a bit on the pod. It's really hard because no one likes losing their best players. Obviously, we want to keep hold of these players. We want to kind of build a team around them. But for a team like Palace, who don't have as much money as some of the other teams in the Premier League, I do think it's really important that we almost get used to selling our best players. As long as we're selling them for a lot of money, I think we almost need to see that as a success. So, yeah, it is going to be really, really interesting. Jack, if we move on to your number one, 4 players so far, 4 different players. Let's see who you've got as your number one.
Yeah, I wish there's 2 players really that were vying for this one, and perhaps one of them I should have included in my other 2. But I'm going to go for the Great Dane. I'm going to go for Joachim Andersen, who I think has been absolutely sensational for us at centre half so far this season. I think he leads the stats across Europe in terms of a lot of defensive facets, but actually it's his ability to influence us going up the pitch as well as our defensive output too. I think he's technically wonderful, but defensively, him and his his sidekick, which is probably doing Mark Gay a disservice. Actually, they're sidekicks to one another. There's no Batman or Robin in that situation. They're just absolutely sensational, and I would say they are the 2 best centre halves that I've ever seen play for Palace. So it's unfair to leave Mark out, and perhaps if I rethought my 2 and 3, I might possibly have added Mark in there. But Joachim Andersen for me has just been absolutely brilliant, and is another player who's seen his name linked with moves across to Champions League teams, and it's amazing, really, and not to do Palace a disservice here, but it really is amazing that in that summer of 21, nobody else wanted to have a go at Joachim Andersen because, for the relatively small investment of, again, not by Palace standards necessarily, but across Europe, £15 million, I think, was the initial outlay for a guy who's incredibly comfortable both defensively and with the ball at his feet is a snip. So for Palace to get that deal over the line just really kind of ramps up the impressiveness of that 21 window. But yeah, Joachim Andersen for me is the player of the season so far.
So I've also gone for Joachim Andersen. And I must admit, when I was picking these 3 players, I tried not to have too much recency bias. And I feel as though Joachim wasn't at his best on Saturday. So it might have been easy to downgrade him. But I tried to look at the first 12 games as a whole and think about, who's been the biggest net positive or whose contributions would we have missed the most? And for me, that's why Joachim Andersen came out on top, because I think defensively in certain games this season, I'm thinking Sheffield United on the opening day, Burnley last week as well. I thought he was absolutely excellent. And then also going forwards, we all know about his passing range and those cross-field balls, but think about that goal against Brentford. That is not a goal that a normal centre-half scores, kind of following his pass into the box, the 1-2 around the corner, and then the finish. And then, of course, the one at Man United. And I think if you take out that Man United win from our season so far, the way we're kind of looking at it and talking about it might be quite different. I feel as though it'd be a lot more kind of negative. So I think that was a massive goal for us. And again, the technique on that is absolutely ridiculous. I know we're talking about modern centre-halves, but for a centre-half to be able to finish like that is absolutely outstanding. So, yeah, for me, I went for Joachim Andersen. Obviously, you mentioned Mark Gahey. It's hard to talk about Joachim and not talk about Mark. And listen, I think that it's a bold call, but I think that in 15, 20 years' time, we might talk about Mark Gahey as being one of the best players to ever play for Palace because he's got such a high ceiling. He could go on and basically win everything, to be honest with you. He's that good. But maybe we hold him to a slightly higher standard. I do think they're actually different types of centre-half as well, which does help. But yeah, I think when you look at the 12 games as a whole, I also wanted to go for Joachim Andersen.
Yeah, I think that really good point actually about the United game. I think that probably is the tipping point of this season so far, and how a lot of Palace fans are assessing it. Without that 3 points, the season looks a little bit shorter than where we're at the moment. So I think that's a really good point. Obviously, Joachim was a massive part of that because it was his goal, his wonderful goal that day. But the Brentford goal was, a very different type of goal. But as you allude to, that ability to just kind of take a game by the scruff of its neck and say, no, I'm going to influence it now. And the keeper would have been disappointed that day, no doubt about it. But that we weren't going to score that day. I was there that day. We weren't going to do anything unless one of the players, and it happened to be a centre half, but unless one of the players decided I'm going to take the game and do something right now myself, I don't think we would have come away with anything. So, you could argue that Joachim has directly influenced a number of games this season in terms of offensive output, let alone the defensive resolve that he shows. But I think it probably is unfair to not have Mark. If we're talking across 6 players, we probably do need to shout out Mark Gay because, as you say, his ceiling is so high. I think Palace fans think that even if he drops a slight level in a game, you think, oh, okay, he's not had a good game today. But the guy plays to such a high level. I mean, defensively, he's outstanding. For me, it's his use of the ball that is just getting better and better and better week on week. And Saturday, there were several left-footed, which is his weaker foot, left-footed crossfield passes, which put us on the front foot. And when we're going to have Michael Elise on that wing, that's going to be even more dangerous a weapon. So Mark Gay is just wonderful too. I think there's a distinct chance that he will feature for England at the Euros next year. It'll be interesting to see how Gareth Southgate deploys him during this international break. But with the absences of Stones, Dunk, who started a few games recently, if we're allowed to use his name on this podcast, I think Levi Colwell's had to pull out as well. So there's an avenue there for Mark Gay to get minutes in this international break. So it'll be interesting to see how the manager uses him. But yeah, I agree with you. His ceiling is very high. The hope is that he too, with Eberechi Eze, Michael Elise, in terms of kind of the younger players, is also rewarded with an extended contract just to protect the asset more so. I think we all accept that Mark Gay is not going to play for Crystal Palace for his whole career. The guy is going to go and play Champions League football. He wants to play at the very top. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to provide him that. So a few more years. But again, the guy's 22, 23. He's got time. He probably could afford a couple more years with Palace. But Palace need to reward him for his talents and his contributions with an improved contract, as they have done with the number 7 and the number 10. So, yeah, he's a wonderful player. So he probably is an honourable mention, and probably the one that we've not mentioned. I think that listeners might be wondering how he missed out. But I think Joachim Andersen is definitely, for me, the player of the season so far.
As you say, I think that new contract is really important because just thinking about the rest of the season and then the Euros, let's say Mark Gahey has a really good second half of the season and then he does start for England at the Euros. England go deep into the tournament. I'm not going to say they're going to win it, but they go deep into the tournament. You would imagine that a lot of clubs will be looking at Mark Gahey next summer because he plays for a Crystal Palace, because he's not playing for a team that's already in the Champions League. And given his age, given his profile, given his maturity, if he is under contract and a long contract, you could easily see a top team dropping a massive fee to bring him in because, he really does have it all. And I completely agree with you. I think in possession, he's getting better and better. Obviously, we saw that burst forward against Nottingham Forest that got quite a bit of attention. Not as much as Murillo's burst forward, but got a fair amount of attention. But then also just little things like every now and again, he'll just kind of almost do a pirouette and move away from the attacker and burst into space. And as you said, those left-footed crossfield balls, I actually thought on Saturday he did a pretty good job against Calvert-Lewin because Calvert-Lewin's bullied him in the past and actually thought he did really well. He probably didn't deserve to concede 3 goals. Just a couple of other players I wanted to mention because some people might feel as though they've been a little bit hard done by, not being spoken about. Obviously, Odsonne Edouard, 5 Premier League goals so far this season. He's already matched his tally for last season. Right. What do you make of Odsonne? Because he is a character that can divide opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned recency bias earlier, and I think I've probably, pre-recording, I mentioned Odsonne to you, but I think he probably didn't make my top 3 because of how indifferent he was on Saturday. And I say that in spite of him scoring a goal, but I found his general performance incredibly frustrating on Saturday. I thought his hesitancy in front of goal was a negative to look at, but actually it was his general hold-up play. And Everton's first goal within the first minute comes from Odsonne Edouard not really doing enough on the halfway line. I acknowledge that there was 2 phases of play after it that we should have done better too, but centre forward, whoever it is, does need to do a better job at occupying centre halves, and it was too easy for Everton on Saturday. So it's probably recency bias, but 5-11 is a great return, as you say. He's matched last season's tally, which had gone past me. I hadn't noticed that, so that's good for him. I mean, what would that be? I'm just trying to do some very quick math. Probably finishing the season on roughly 17, 18 league goals, which would be an incredible return and would be our highest league return, I think, since Benteke's first season in the Premier League. So it's probably harsh again that he's not been mentioned, but I think there's elements of his play which are just infuriating. The issue is there's no real competition for him as that number 9. I think we saw on Saturday when Jean-Philippe Mateta came on, and the lack of impact. We recorded last night, and Ruben Pins joined us, and he advised that Jean-Philippe Mateta had 2 touches in 16 minutes on the pitch, and that's not enough any time. But let alone when your team is looking to grab an equaliser, you need your centre forward to be around and getting on the end of things. So Jean-Philippe Mateta's not really putting that pressure on Odsonne-Edouard. So Odsonne-Edouard is the number 9. But 5-11 is a great return. So you've got to look at the positive and hope that he adds to that as the season goes on. But yeah, there are other elements of his game that are quite frustrating. What about you?
I must admit, I thought Saturday's performance from Odsonne was just classic Odsonne-Edouard for Palace, because he scored the goal, which is fantastic. But as you said, his overall play was frustrating. I think for me, I find him very static in possession. Lots of times where Everton was sitting off us, Gahir Anderson had the ball, and I just want him to maybe work the channels or peel in behind a bit more, because when he did that, he was actually quite threatening. Also, as you said, I thought he looks quite short on confidence. For someone who's got a few goals behind him so far this season, he looked kind of loath to take shots on a couple of opportunities. I think with Odsonne, he's at his best when things are instinctive. So, I mean, the goal that he scored is a really tidy touch and then finish. But I think he's better when things happen quickly. And also, I think he's better when he's not maybe playing as the main striker. I think we saw at times earlier in the season when Mateta was on the pitch and Odsonne was just playing off him. He can drop that little bit deeper and he can kind of drive with the ball a bit. I feel as though he doesn't enjoy kind of playing with his back to goal, going up against the centre halves. I don't think that actually brings the best out of him. So it is really tricky because we don't really have room to fit him in as kind of a number 10 or something like that. But it's almost as though he needs to work on kind of rounding off certain parts of his game. I do think there's a player in there, which kind of makes it all the more frustrating. But yeah, I do feel as though we do need more from him moving forwards.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the work the good work he did at Celtic came from that slightly deeper position, joining the play and finishing off moves. That was, a classic Odsonne-Edouard move when he was there. And we can't afford him that space because that's where Breach Eze comes in, and that's where we can't have players playing in the same position, and Ebbs is rightly in that position. So players need to adapt. We can't suit everybody's needs, and again, don't want to ignore the 5 goals that he scored, but there are just other elements of the game. I mean, I think even if James Tarkowski had not made that tackle, I think Odsonne-Edouard would still right now be looking to make that shot that came after Eberechi Eze's lovely dummy. So yeah, there's work for Odsonne to do, and I say that despite scoring effectively 1 and 2, which is a very, very bizarre thing to be saying, because I think at the start of the season on your pod, on our pod, we were all saying we hope that he gets a good season and 10 goals would be a good return. Well, he's on course to absolutely smash that. So shouldn't ignore it, but equally just want a little bit more from you, Odsonne.
Yeah. And I think also one of the reasons that we want more from him is because we think he's got the potential. And I almost think that if we weren't kind of being a little bit critical, that might almost mean that we think slightly less of him. I think we think that there is more to come from him. He can be a more kind of rounded, better all-round package as a Premier League striker. So yeah, Odsonne-Edouard, really good start to the campaign. Hopefully he can kick on, keep scoring goals, and hopefully he does get up to kind of 15, 16, possibly even 17 goals this season. Jack, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Fantastic to hear from you. Of course, you can listen to Jack on the 5-Year Plan podcast. You can listen to me and Ben on the Team Called Palace podcast. We're on Facebook, Team Called Palace. We're on Twitter or X at TC Palace Pod. And you can find the weekly pod on Spotify and iTunes. Thanks for watching. See you again very soon.